The manual's cover was still warm when Lieutenant Carroll Nowak picked it up from the dirt floor. Outside the abandoned depot, his horse stamped nervously, sensing something his rider had not yet fully grasped. Nowak brushed off the dust and read the German text. Panzer Kampfwagen Maintenance and Field Repair, 1922 edition, revised 1928. September 12, 1939. Less than 2 weeks since the Wehrmacht had crossed into Poland, and already the world Nowak knew had ceased to exist. His squad and the 32 Lancers had been conducting reconnaissance south of Lodz when they'd spotted the depot, a hastily abandoned German repair station, its tents still standing. Tools scattered across workbenches like the mechanics had simply vanished mid-task. "Sir, you need to see this," called Corporal Wojciech Mazur from deeper inside the main tent. The young cavalryman held up another manual, this one open to a technical diagram. "These tanks, they're showing designs from before I was born." Nowak moved closer, his boots crunching on broken glass. The September afternoon light filtered through the canvas, illuminating the page Mazur held. There, rendered in precise German engineering drawings, was a Panzer I, the very machine that had been terrorizing Polish positions for days. But the date on the diagram read 1923. Theoretical specifications from 16 years ago, now grinding through Polish soil as cold reality. "That cannot be correct," Nowak said, taking the manual. His German was functional, learned during his years at university in Krakow, when the world still made sense, when borders seemed permanent and cavalry still held its pride of place in modern warfare. He flipped through pages of technical specifications, maintenance schedules, and tactical deployment recommendations. Every page bore dates from the 1920s. Some sections had handwritten annotations dated as recently as 1937, but the core content, the fundamental designs, they were relics from the previous decade. Sergeant Pyotr Kowalski, a career soldier who'd served in the Polish-Soviet War of 1920, picked up a third manual. His weathered hands moved carefully across the pages, treating the enemy document with the respect one might show a loaded weapon. "Lieutenant, this explains the combat doctrine we've been seeing. Look here, tank formations moving in coordination with infantry and artillery. They've been practicing this for years, perfecting tactics we dismissed as theoretical." Nowak felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Around him, his men had begun gathering the scattered documents, repair logs, tactical briefings, supply requisitions. Each piece told the same story. The German military machine that had seemed so overwhelmingly modern, so impossibly advanced, was built on foundations laid 20 years prior. 2 decades of preparation, testing, and refinement. "We need to get this to command," Mazur said, his voice tight with urgency. "If they understand what we're facing, they know what we're facing." Kowalski interrupted, his tone flat. "They've seen the same tanks we have. What these papers tell us is that we've had 20 years to prepare for this moment, and we did nothing." Outside, the distant rumble of artillery had grown closer. The September sky, which had dawned clear and blue, now carried the gray-black smudge of burning towns to the north. Nowak's squadron had been cut off from their regiment since yesterday, surviving through luck and the intimate knowledge of local terrain that came from being Polish cavalry. Men who knew every forest path and farm road in their district. Private Jakub Lewandowski, barely 18 and still adjusting to the weight of his lance, appeared at the tent entrance. "Sir, I can hear engines. Heavy ones, coming from the west." Nowak made his decision instantly. "Gather everything that looks important. Mazur, you read German better than anyone. Grab manuals, maps, anything with tactical information. We move in 5 minutes." The men worked with practiced efficiency, stuffing saddlebags with documents. Nowak took a final look around the depot. Spare tank treads lay stacked against one wall. Crates marked with German military stamps contained parts whose purposes he could only guess at. A work order, dated September 10th, detailed repairs for 7 Panzer II tanks, minor maintenance, routine stuff. The casual normalcy of it struck him. To the Germans, this was just logistics. Another day maintaining the machine. He folded the 1922 manual carefully and secured it inside his jacket. Physical evidence. Proof that Poland's cavalry, still training with tactics that had won glory in 1920, was facing an enemy who'd spent 2 decades industrializing warfare while the rest of Europe slept. As they mounted their horses, Kowalski rode close to Nowak. "You realize what this means, don't you? Those tanks breaking through our lines. They're obsolete by German standards. Whatever they're keeping in reserve, whatever they've developed since these designs." He didn't finish the thought. Nowak nodded grimly. The squadron formed up, 32 lancers carrying sabers and rifles against an enemy that had turned war into engineering. As they rode east, seeking friendly lines that might no longer exist, the lieutenant clutched a manual against his chest. They weren't just fighting modern technology. They were fighting the ghost of a future that had been planned and perfected while Poland had convinced itself that courage and cavalry charges would somehow be enough. The engines grew louder behind them. The forest had seemed like salvation when they'd entered it an hour before sunset. Now, as darkness settled between the pine trees, Lieutenant Nowak realized it might become their tomb. The squadron had covered nearly 40 kilometers since leaving the depot, pushing their horses harder than any cavalryman liked. Behind them, the mechanical growl of German armor had faded, replaced by the softer sounds of night. Wind through branches, the nervous breathing of exhausted horses, the creak of leather as men shifted in their saddles. Corporal Panzer rode up beside Nowak, keeping his voice low. "Sir, the men need rest. The horses are spent, and we haven't eaten since morning." Nowak knew this. He could feel his own mount trembling beneath him, muscles pushed beyond reasonable limits. But stopping meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death. Still, Panzer was right. Push much further and the horses would collapse, leaving them as infantry in a country where being on foot meant being targets. "We'll stop here," Nowak decided, gesturing to a small clearing surrounded by dense undergrowth. Cold camp. No fires. Kowalski set a perimeter with 4 watchers, rotating every 2 hours. The men dismounted with groans of relief, their legs stiff from hours in the saddle. They moved quietly, veterans teaching younger soldiers the art of silence, how to remove tack without letting buckles clink, how to walk without snapping branches, how to become invisible in their own land. Private Lewandowski tended his horse with the devotion of a man who understood that his survival depended on the animal's welfare, carefully checking hooves and wiping down flanks despite his own exhaustion. Nowak found a fallen log and sat, pulling out the German manual. Sergeant Kowalski joined him, producing a small flashlight from his pack and cupping his hand around it to minimize the glow. Together, they studied the pages they hadn't had time to examine at the depot. "Look at this section," Kowalski said, pointing to a chapter titled Combined Arms Coordination. "They've worked out signals between tanks, infantry, and aircraft, specific procedures for every scenario. When we train for modern warfare, we focus on how cavalry could charge faster. They were figuring out how to make machines talk to each other." Nowak traced his finger across a diagram, showing radio communication networks. The manual described wireless coordination between armored units, something Polish doctrine still treated as experimental. The Germans had been refining it for over a decade. Every tactical problem the Polish army was discovering in real time during the September nightmare, the Wehrmacht had already solved on practice fields years ago. "Here's what troubles me most," Nowak said, turning to a maintenance schedule. "These tanks, the Panzer I and II, they're designed for training and light combat. The manual says so explicitly. These are the machines they use to teach their crews before moving them to heavier vehicles. We're being destroyed by their practice equipment." Kowalski was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a man whose entire worldview had crumbled. "I fought the Bolsheviks in 1920. We won that war with cavalry charges and Polish courage. When the generals planned for the next war, they assumed it would be the same, just with better horses and braver men. We built our entire defense around what worked before, and they built theirs around what would work next." Nowak finished. Panzer approached quietly, carrying his own burden of captured documents. "Sir, I've been reading through these tactical reports. There's a pattern. The Germans aren't just attacking randomly. Every movement we've seen, every breakthrough, it follows procedures written down here. They're executing a plan they've practiced dozens of times. He spread out a tactical map marked with German annotations. Even in the dim flashlight glow, the strategy was clear. Pincer movements coordinated between motorized infantry and armor, with cavalry relegated to reconnaissance and rear guard actions. The Polish High Command had positioned their forces to fight a Great War rematch. The Germans had prepared for something entirely different. "We need to get this information to Warsaw," Nowak said, "or to whatever remains of organized command. If our generals understand the scope of German preparation, maybe they can adapt." "With respect, sir," Kowalski said carefully, "our generals know we're losing. What these papers prove is why we never had a chance to win. That's not intelligence. That's just confirmation of failure." The words hung heavy in the forest air. Around them, exhausted cavalrymen tried to sleep sitting up, unwilling to fully relax even in the darkness. Some clean weapons they'd barely had reason to fire, their training demanding action even when action was pointless. Others simply stared into the night, processing the reality that their entire military tradition had become obsolete while they'd been polishing their sabers. Private Lewandowski settled near Nowak, chewing on a piece of hard bread he produced from his pack. The young soldier had shown remarkable composure for someone barely out of training, but Nowak could see the questions forming behind his eyes. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Nowak nodded. "My father fought in the Great War. He told me stories about cavalry charges, about honor in combat. He said the next war will be different, but that Polish courage would see us through any challenge." Lewandowski paused, struggling with what to say next. "These manuals we found, they make it seem like courage doesn't matter anymore. Like war became mathematics while we were practicing with lances." It was the most articulate summary of their situation Nowak had heard. War is mathematics, logistics and planning trumping valor and tradition. The lieutenant wanted to offer comfort, to tell the young private that individual courage still mattered. But the manual in his hands told a different story. The Germans had calculated precisely how many tanks, moving at specific speeds with predetermined support, could break through defensive positions. They'd reduced warfare to engineering problems and solved each one methodically. Courage always matters. Nowak said finally, no, it was both true and insufficient. But courage without adaptation is just another word for stubbornness. A sound cut through the night, the distant rumble of engines, far off but unmistakable. Every man in the clearing tensed, hands moving instinctively to weapons. Kowalski extinguished the flashlight immediately, plunging them into darkness relieved only by weak moonlight filtering through the canopy. Nowak stood slowly listening. The sound wasn't coming closer, but it wasn't fading either. A convoy moving parallel to their position, perhaps a kilometer away. Tanks or trucks, impossible to tell from this distance, but definitely German, definitely numerous. "They're everywhere," Mazer whispered. "How do we fight an enemy that's everywhere at once?" Nowak had no answer. The manual had taught him that the Germans weren't everywhere. They just moved fast enough and coordinated well enough to seem omnipresent. Motorized warfare, perfected over 2 decades while Poland's cavalry had practiced charges that would have made their grandfathers proud. The squadron remained frozen, listening to the enemy pass in the darkness, ghosts of machines hunting for men on horses. Dawn brought fog and the smell of smoke. Lieutenant Nowak woke to find Sergeant Kowalski already standing watch, his rifle cradled across his chest as he stared into the gray morning. The forest had protected them through the night, but daylight would make them visible again, targets for an enemy that seemed to have eyes everywhere. Movement to the south, Kowalski reported quietly as Nowak approached. Not German, Polish infantry, maybe a company's worth, moving east like us. They passed about an hour ago, staying off the roads. "Did you make contact?" "No, sir. They looked broken, moving without formation, without purpose. Just running." Kowalski's jaw tightened. "I've seen retreat before, but this is different. This is collapse." The squadron roused itself slowly, men moving with the stiffness of those who'd slept in their saddles or on hard ground. They shared what little food remained: hard bread, some dried meat, water from canteens refilled at a stream during the night. No one spoke much. There wasn't much to say. Nowak gathered his NCOs around the German manual one final time before they moved out. In the morning light, the pages seemed even more damning. He'd spent hours during his watch reading technical specifications, trying to understand not just what the Germans had built, but how they'd thought about building it. "There's a section here on armor doctrine evolution," he said, pointing to a chapter near the back. Written in 1928, the author argues that tanks shouldn't support infantry. Infantry should support tanks. Everything should move at the speed of armor, not the speed of marching men. They've been building their entire army around this idea for over a decade. Corporal Panzer leaned in to read. "And we built ours around cavalry mobility. Except their machines move faster than our horses, hit harder than our lances, and don't need to eat or sleep. They need fuel and maintenance," Private Lewandowski interjected. Everyone turned to look at the young soldier, who seemed surprised by his own boldness. "I mean, the manual talks about that. Mechanical breakdowns, supply lines for fuel and parts. They're vulnerable when they're stationary for repairs." Nowak felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in days. Not hope exactly, but possibility. The private was right. Every page of maintenance procedures, every technical diagram, revealed dependencies. The German war machine ran on gasoline and spare parts, on supply convoys and repair depots like the one they found yesterday. "The depot we discovered," Nowak said slowly, thinking aloud. "It wasn't random. They need those positions to keep their tanks operational. And if they need them, they're vulnerable there." Kowalski caught his meaning immediately. "You're thinking we could hit their logistics, not the tanks themselves, but the infrastructure keeping them running." "It's what cavalry has always done best," Nowak replied. "Raiding supply lines, hitting targets behind enemy lines. We can't fight their armor head-on, but we might be able to starve it." The idea took shape as they discussed it. Traditional cavalry roles, reconnaissance raids, disruption, weren't obsolete. They'd simply been overshadowed by the initial shock of combined arms warfare. But the German advance, as methodical as it appeared, still depended on vulnerable supply chains stretching back to the border. "First, we need to reach friendly lines," Nowak decided. "Get this intelligence to someone who can use it. Then we volunteer for the kind of work cavalry can still do effectively." They mounted up and moved out, keeping to the forest as long as possible. The fog provided cover, but also disorientation. Twice they heard German voices, close enough that they could make out individual words, and had to divert around enemy positions. The Wehrmacht was everywhere now, probing roads and villages, consolidating control with the efficiency described in those 20-year-old manuals. Around mid-morning, they emerged from the tree line onto a low ridge overlooking a valley. What they saw stopped them cold. Below, stretching for kilometers, was a German supply column, trucks, fuel tankers, ammunition carriers, and support vehicles moving in an organized convoy toward the front. Motorcycle scouts range ahead and behind, maintaining security. It was a logistical backbone of the offensive, the reality behind the tactical theory Nowak had been reading about. "Must be 200 vehicles," Panzer breathed. "Maybe more." Nowak pulled out his binoculars and studied the column. At the rear, separated slightly from the main convoy, was a cluster of recovery vehicles and what appeared to be mobile repair equipment. Even as he watched, a Panzer II with obvious track damage was being towed by one of the recovery vehicles. The Germans were maintaining their machines even in transit, keeping the offensive rolling without pause. "We should hit them," Lewandowski said suddenly. All eyes turned to the young private. "Sir, I mean we should hit them. 32 cavalry against 200 vehicles sounds insane, but we have surprise. We could damage enough vehicles to slow them down, maybe destroy some fuel trucks." "It would be suicide," Kowalski said flatly. "The moment we reveal ourselves, those motorcycle scouts would call in air support or armor. We'd be dead before we reached the valley floor." "Maybe," Lewandowski persisted, "but we're dead anyway if we just keep running. At least this way we'd accomplish something." Nowak felt torn between two impulses. The tactical wisdom that said preserving his squadron was paramount, and a desperate rage that wanted to strike back somehow, Anyhow, against an enemy that had rendered his entire military tradition obsolete. The manual in his jacket pocket seemed to grow heavier. All that German preparation, all those years of planning and testing, reduced to trucks carrying fuel and bullets. Unglamorous but essential. We're not attacking, Nowak said finally, but we're going to track them, mark their route, identify their patterns. This column has to stop eventually, to refuel, to rest their drivers. Something, when it does, we'll know where, and we'll know what kind of guard force they use. It was a compromise between action and survival, between cavalry tradition and modern reality. They would observe, gather intelligence, and strike only when the odds shifted in their favor. It wasn't glorious. It wouldn't be remembered in songs. But it was what the situation demanded. The squadron followed the convoy from the ridgeline, staying parallel and out of sight. Nowak had Mazer document everything. Vehicle types, space in between elements, the timing of scout rotations. The German manual had taught them to think systematically. They would apply those lessons against their enemy. As afternoon wore on, the column began to slow. Ahead, visible even from their elevated position, was the town of Trybunalski, or what remained of it. Smoke rose from several buildings, and the distinctive damage of artillery bombardment marked the outskirts. The Germans were stopping to establish a forward depot, exactly as Nowak had predicted. "Tonight," he told his men, "we rest today, watch their procedures, learn their patterns. Tonight, we give them a reason to remember that Polish cavalry isn't dead yet." The squadron settled into concealed positions, watching the Germans work with mechanical efficiency to establish their supply point. Every action seemed rehearsed, every task assigned with precision. Even their logistics had been perfected over 20 years of preparation. But preparation, Nowak thought, sometimes bred predictability, and predictability created opportunity. He opened the manual one more time, studying the chapter on field supply procedures. Somewhere in those pages, written by German efficiency experts a decade ago, might be the weakness that 32 Polish cavalrymen could exploit. The sun descended toward the horizon, and Lieutenant Nowak planned his first strike against an enemy 20 years ahead in preparation, but, he hoped, vulnerable in this exact moment. The German supply depot hummed with activity as dusk settled over Trybunalski. Lieutenant Nowak watched from his concealed position on the ridge, observing the enemy's methodical establishment of their logistics hub. Fuel trucks formed neat rows along what had been the town square. Ammunition was being unloaded into a requisition warehouse. Sentries walked predictable patterns, changing every 2 hours exactly as the manual had specified. Sergeant Kowalski crawled up beside him, bringing a hand-drawn map of the depot layout. "I've counted 47 guards, sir. They rotate in shifts, 8 men on perimeter, for patrolling between the fuel depot and ammunition stores, 2 at the command post. The rest are sleeping or eating in that hotel they've taken over." "Radio communications?" Nowak asked. "Single antenna on the command post roof. Probably short-range tactical radio. If they call for support, response time would be, 15 minutes for ground forces, maybe 10 for air support if they have spotters in the area." Nowak nodded, his mind calculating possibilities against probabilities. The manual had been explicit about German doctrine for rear area security, sufficient to deter opportunistic attacks, but not excessive enough to drain resources from the front. The Wehrmacht assumed their enemies were in full retreat, disorganized and demoralized. They weren't expecting coordinated cavalry raids. Corporal Mazer joined them, his face tight with concern. "Sir, I've been thinking about the private suggestion earlier, about hitting them. Even if we succeed, even if we damage some vehicles and escape, what does it actually accomplish? We might delay this column by a day, maybe 2, but there are dozens more behind it. It accomplishes proof," Nowak replied quietly. "Proof that their system has vulnerabilities, proof that we can adapt, and proof that Polish cavalry can still fight, even if we can't fight the way our fathers did." He pulled out the German manual, now worn from constant handling. "This entire doctrine assumes their supply lines are secure because their enemies are broken. They plan for fighting armies, not for insurgent tactics. If we can demonstrate that their rear areas aren't safe, They have to divert resources from the front. They have to slow down. Or they just burn every village between here and Warsaw in retaliation, Kowalski said grimly. It was a legitimate concern, one that had weighed on Nowak throughout the afternoon. The Germans had shown no mercy to resistance. Striking their supply lines might provoke collective punishment, but surrender and retreat hadn't spared Polish civilians either. The Wehrmacht was executing its 20-year-old plan with mechanical indifference to Polish lives. We hit them tonight, Nowak decided, but we'd do it smart. Quick strike on the fuel depot, cause maximum damage, and disappear before they can organize pursuit. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We're cavalry. Mobility is our advantage. As full darkness descended, the squadron prepared. They would leave their horses 2 kilometers away with 3 guards, approaching the depot on foot. Speed of escape mattered more than speed of approach. Each man carried what he could: rifles, grenades salvaged from abandoned Polish positions, bottles filled with gasoline from their own meager supplies. They would fight with whatever weapons they possessed against an enemy equipped with industrial precision. Private Lewandowski checked his rifle for the 3rd time, his hand steady despite the obvious fear in his eyes. "Sir, after this, if we survive, what happens to us?" "We keep fighting," Nowak said simply. "Maybe not in ways the cavalry manual teaches. Maybe not in ways that earn medals or songs. But we fight until there's nothing left to fight for or nothing left to fight with." At midnight, they moved. 32 men became ghosts, slipping through the darkness toward the town. The September night was cool, carrying the scent of burning and the distant sound of German voices, singing in their appropriated quarters. The sentries maintained their predictable patterns, trusting in routine and the assumption of safety. Nowak's team reached the fuel depot first. 26 trucks and tankers, parked with German precision, each one a critical artery in the supply network feeding the offensive. He positioned his men carefully, remembering the coordination principles from the German manual. Simultaneous action from multiple points, overwhelming force applied to specific targets, rapid withdrawal before the enemy could respond. The nearest sentry was 40 meters away, walking his patrol route with mechanical regularity. Nowak counted his paces, timing the pattern. When the guard turned away, Kowalski and Panzer moved forward with their bottles of gasoline, placing them against fuel truck tires and under engine compartments. Minutes stretched like hours. Each placement felt impossibly loud, every footstep a potential alarm. But the Germans, so perfectly prepared for conventional warfare, had no procedures for silent men with desperate purpose moving through their secure areas. At the ammunition warehouse, Lewandowski and his team worked with similar care. The grenades they carried were old, Polish-made, reliable. They positioned them in doorways and near stacked crates, creating a chain reaction that would consume the entire building once initiated. Nowak checked his watch. 12:17. The sentry would complete his current circuit at 12:20, then pause for a cigarette as he'd done the previous 2 rotations. Human predictability within mechanical precision. In that moment of relaxation, they would strike. The seconds crawled past. Nowak's heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Around him, his men waited with Polish discipline. The same discipline that held cavalry formations together in the 1920 war, now applied to guerrilla tactics against an enemy 20 years more prepared. 12:20. The sentry stopped, exactly on schedule, reached for his cigarettes. Nowak gave the signal. Panzer struck the match that lit the first bottle. Flames spread across gasoline-soaked ground, racing toward fuel trucks with hungry inevitability. Within seconds, the first explosion shattered the night, a fuel truck erupting in orange fury that illuminated the entire depot. Chaos erupted instantly. Germans shouted, scrambling from their quarters. The ammunition warehouse exploded next, a series of detonations that sent shockwaves across the town. Secondary explosions followed as fuel tanks cooked off, each blast adding to the pandemonium. The Polish cavalry ran, not in panic, but with purpose, back toward the extraction point, covering each other's withdrawal with practiced precision. Behind them, the German supply depot burned, flames reaching into the night sky like accusatory fingers. Rifle fire cracked out, Germans shooting at shadows and flames, their discipline momentarily shattered by surprise. A bullet caught one of Nowak's men, Private Kaminsky, spinning him around. Kowalski grabbed him without breaking stride, half carrying the wounded cavalryman toward safety. They reached the horses in controlled chaos, mounting while the Germans were still organized in pursuit. The depot continued to explode behind them, each blast a small victory against an enemy that had seemed invincible. Nowak led his squadron east, away from the flames, into the darkness that had protected cavalry raiders for centuries. 3 kilometers from Pyatkov Tribunalski, they stopped to assess damage. Kaminsky had taken a bullet through his shoulder, painful but survivable. The rest had escaped without serious injury. Behind them, the glow of burning German supplies lit the horizon. "We did it," Lewandowski said, his voice mixing disbelief with pride. "We actually hurt them." "We delayed them," Nowak corrected, but he couldn't suppress a grim smile. "Maybe 12 hours, maybe a day, but we proved something important." He pulled out the German manual one final time, its pages now stained with dirt and smoke. 20 years of preparation had given the Wehrmacht overwhelming advantage in conventional warfare. But war was never purely conventional. There would always be space for adaptation, for creativity, for men willing to fight against the odds. "What now, sir?" Mazer asked. Nowak looked at his exhausted squadron. 32 cavalrymen who'd learned to fight a new kind of war. They couldn't charge tanks with lances. They couldn't match German coordination and firepower. But they could raid, harass, and disrupt. They could force the Wehrmacht to guard supply lines and worry about their rear areas. "Now we find more depots," Nowak said. "We learn from what worked tonight and what didn't. We become the war the Germans didn't plan for." In the distance, German vehicles were finally organized in pursuit, their engines roaring into the night. But the Polish cavalry had already vanished, ghosts on horseback carrying German secrets and newfound purpose. The manual had taught them they were fighting 20 years behind. Tonight, they'd learned that being behind didn't mean being beaten. It just meant fighting differently. As they rode through the September darkness, Lieutenant Colonel Nowak understood that Poland would fall. The math was too stark, the German preparation too thorough. But how Poland fell, whether with courage and resistance or simply broken under mechanical efficiency, that was still being decided. His squadron had chosen resistance. Behind them, the German depot continued to burn, a small flame of defiance against an overwhelming darkness. And somewhere in the chaos of 1939 Poland, other cavalrymen might see that flame and remember that adaptation was its own kind of courage. The manual in Nowak's jacket pocket had revealed the enemy's strengths, but it had also inadvertently shown him their patterns. And patterns could be exploited. They rode east toward an uncertain dawn, carrying captured knowledge and hard-won understanding. The war was lost, but individual battles, small, unglamorous battles fought in the darkness by men on horses against machines, those could still be won. It wasn't the cavalry tradition they'd inherited, but it was a tradition they would create.